how Israel's history is a statement that God knew what he was going to do with them, that God exists and not only that he exists, but he knows the beginning from the end. And Israel is a witness to that fact. And so we're going to look at that, and we'll look particularly, we could spend probably several hours showing how this passage was fulfilled in Israel's history. We're going to look at select pieces throughout the passage and see how God knew what he was going to do with the people of Israel. God says in the book of Isaiah, and we'll turn it up because I know you can't read that on the screen, Isaiah chapter 42, and starting in Isaiah chapter 43 and verse 8, that was the purpose of Israel, or one of the purposes of Israel, to be witnesses to him. He says, "Bring out the people who are blind, yet have eyes, and are deaf and yet have ears. All the nations gather together, and the peoples assemble. Who among them can declare this, and show us the former things, and say, it is true? You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servants whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me, and understand that I am he. Before me no God was formed, and there shall be none after me. I am the Lord, and besides me there is no Savior. I declared and saved and proclaimed when there was no strange God among you. And you are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and I am God, and henceforth I am he, and there is none who can deliver from my hand. I work, and who can take it back?" And so God states that part of the purpose of Israel was to be his witness that he was God. And the way he was going to do that was he was going to tell them specifically what was going to come to pass, and then it would come to pass. So if we look up a dictionary definition of a witness, there's two different definitions. There's the one that says it's a person who sees an event take place, like if you witnessed a crime. And in that sense, Israel was a witness in that they saw the miracles and they saw the wonders of God. And yet, it's not that sense he means, because all of those Israelites who saw the workings of God are not with us anymore. And yet, there's a second definition that says that witness means to be the evidence or the proof. And that's what he means, that they are the evidence. Their history is the evidence fulfilling that God knew from the beginning what would take place. He declared it, and it came to pass. And so we read in Deuteronomy chapter 28 these blessings and cursings, and there's about 15 verses of blessing and probably about 50 to 55 verses of curses. And Israel's history is probably somewhat allocated in that amount of time to each of those as well. He says in Deuteronomy 28 and verse 2, "All these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord your God." And yet there were curses as well. Verse 15, "But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all the commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee." And so God predicts the blessings and the curses. And he's very specific in some of these things, as Joachim read for us. He says, "And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou or thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And among these nations it shall find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot find rest. But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart, and the failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind, and thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear the day and night, and shalt have none assurance of thy life. And so he tells them what is going to come to pass. Very specific promises or curses, so to speak. No place to rest. No, your life hanging in doubt. If we continue in Deuteronomy, which we didn't, but chapter 30 gives the reverse. That it won't be forever, he says, and it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessings and the curse, then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. But if any of thine be driven out from unto the outmost parts of the earth, from thence will the Lord thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee, and the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thou hast and thy fathers have possessed. And thou shalt possess it, and he will do thee good, and multiply thee above thy fathers. And so we have these passages from Deuteronomy, and I picked these passages in particular because even the harshest critic of the Bible has to accept that these verses were written hundreds of years before the time of Jesus. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls that show that these verses were in existence in antiquity. These aren't newly created things. These are passages from of old that predicted the history of the children of Israel. And as we go through their history tonight, we'll see some of the very specific ways in which these passages, this whole chapter in Deuteronomy chapter 28, has been fulfilled. So we know, we're told at the time of Joshua that the blessings that were blessed did come upon them. In fact, he says in Joshua chapter 21 that there failed not aught any of the good things which the Lord had spoken unto the house of Israel. All came to pass. And I believe that's reference to the promises, those blessings that came upon them. All those good things that were to happen did happen. And yet, there was another side to all of it, because they did not continue to follow the word and the commandments of God. We know from history that they were taken into captivity, that their nation came to an end. And there were more prophecies about them. We have, for instance, the prophecy of Daniel, chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and predicted subsequent nations coming upon them to overtake their kingdom, first Babylon, and then Persia, and then Greece, and then Rome. And these things we know came to pass. We have in 586, when Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came upon them and wrought upon them the destruction that was initially promised in Deuteronomy 28. And the city of Jerusalem was taken, and the children of Israel were carried off into captivity. We know that Cyrus and the Persians allowed them to return to the land, and yet they were still under the control of the Persians. They were allowed to return and to build their house. And then the Persians, as was prophesied, were overthrown by Alexander the Great. And the prophecies further prophecies in Daniel came to pass. The kingdom of Greece, after the death of Alexander, was split, and the southern portion was ruled by Ptolemy. And initially, he grew strong and overtook the land, and the prophecies in Daniel 11 came to pass. But then the king of the north, Seleucus, came to power and defiled the temple. The Jews had saviors risen up among them, Judas of Maccabeus, one of them, who temporarily gained control of their nation until the Romans came upon them and overthrew them, fulfilling the prophecies again of Daniel. And we know the Romans took Jerusalem in 70 AD, and they burned the city and they tore down the temple. And the prophecies were fulfilled. And this was the beginning of the exile of the Jewish people outside of the land and their wanderings. In 135 AD, what is known as the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Jews were finally ordered expelled from Judea. Emperor Hadrian forbade the Jews, upon pain of death, to even look upon the city of Jerusalem. And he renamed that city Aelia Capitolina. And in the place of the temple, he built a temple to Jupiter. And from that point, the Jews were forbidden into the land. In 325, the Roman Empire came under the power of Constantine, who was a Christian leader. And Jerusalem then becomes a Christian city. And in a nod to the Jews, Constantine gave a favor to the Jews. One day a year, on the day of the destruction of the temple, they were allowed to visit the city of Jerusalem. But in 638 AD, the Arabs took over from the Christians. They conquered the city of Jerusalem. And on the site of the temple, they built a mosque. Although they did allow the Jews to return to the city of Jerusalem. And for several hundred years, the Arabs ruled the city of Jerusalem, allowing the Jews also to live there. But in 1072, the Turks took over from the Arabs and captured the city of Jerusalem. They barred Christian pilgrims from visiting, which gave rise to the Crusaders. The Crusaders were Christian warriors going back to the Holy Land to reconquer it for the Christians. And they stopped along their way, attacking synagogues and killing over 5,000 Jews. They took Jerusalem from the Turks and massacred all the Jews that lived in the city in the process, and again banned all Jews from entering Jerusalem. And with this became the rise of Jewish persecution throughout the world. Philip Augustus, king of France, confiscated all Jewish property, and he expelled all Jews from Paris. And for the next 500 or so years, this anti-Jewish sentiment swept across the continent of Europe. In 1178, the Crusaders were cast out of Jerusalem, and Saladin allowed the Jews to return to living in Jerusalem. And yet in Europe, 1215, the Lateran Council in Rome declares Jews must wear a badge of shame in all Christian countries. We're familiar with this from the 20th century, but it actually started 800 years earlier. In 1240, in Austria, Jewish property was confiscated and Jews imprisoned, converted, expelled, or burned. In 1254, in France, Louis IX expels the Jews from France and confiscates their property. 1264, in Germany, the Council of Vienna declares all Jews must wear a pointed dunce cap, and thousands were murdered. In 1275, in England, King Edward forces all Jews to wear the yellow badge. 1279, in Hungary and Poland, Jews are forced to wear a red badge of shame. And in 1290, in England, again, Edward issues an edict banishing all Jews from England. In the following year, France promptly follows suit. A year later, in Italy, Jews are forced to convert or be expelled. A few years later, Germany and Austria, there are anti-Jewish riots that led to the death of over 100,000 Jews. In the 1360s, in Spain, anti-Jewish riots led to the death of over 20,000 Jews. And in 1389, in Prague, anti-Jewish mobs slaughtered over 30,000 Jews, destroyed synagogues, and desecrated cemeteries. Changes hands, and now is under control of the Ottoman Turks. Meanwhile, in England, expulsions of Jews from countries continued. In Spain in 1492, Lithuania in 1495, Portugal 1497, Germany 1499, in Naples in 1519, Bohemia in 1542, Bavaria in 1551, Austria in 1559, Prague in 1561, the Papal States in 1569, from the Netherlands in 1582, from Frankfurt in 1614, from Kiev in 1619, from the Ukraine in 1649, and then from Hamburg also in 1649, from Vienna in 1670, from Russia in 1727, and from Prussia in 1843. And so, from one country to another, the Jews are cast out and pushed away, and they go and settle to another, in which a few years they're again cast out and pushed away. In 1555, Pope Paul IV installs a ghetto for Jews in Rome that's locked nightly, and the Jews are forced to wear a yellow hat. In the 1650s, in Ukraine, the Cossacks murder over 100,000 Jews. In Russia, pogroms sweep through Russia, eventually resulting in the immigration of over 2 million Jews. So you can see this continued throughout their history, throughout the 2,000 years from the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, until the time came in 1917, when the British mandate over Palestine, established by the Balfour Declaration, that a homeland was to be set up in the country of Palestine for the Jews. And so they had hope that perhaps the fulfillment of Deuteronomy 30 was about to occur. And then came the Second World War. And in Germany, the Holocaust, resulting in the extermination of over 6 million Jews from all over Europe. That resulted in the United Nations partition of the land of Palestine into a Jewish and an Arab state. And yet, when the Jews declared independence, there was immediate war to push them out. And in the end, Israel won that war and established the state of Israel. In 1967, again with the 6 Days War, they retake the city of Jerusalem, which since the year 70 AD had been in the hands of Gentiles. And although they have come back to the land, it has not stopped the anti-Jewish sentiment. We're all very familiar with the October attacks of 2023, which has resulted in the current war. In the Gaza Strip. So in the big picture, we see these prophecies with very specific promises that the Lord shall scatter thee among all the people, from one end to the earth, even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But the Lord shall give there thee a trembling heart, and the failing eyes, and a sorrow of mind, and thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shall have none assurance of thy life. We have seen that take place, particularly over the last 500 years. But we have also seen, in the Deuteronomy 30, it shall come to pass when these things are come upon thee, and the blessings and the curses, that the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity, and have compassion on thee, and will return and gather thee from all nations whither the Lord hath scattered thee. And so we might ask ourselves, why is this that God has brought them back? Why is it that God has used them? He stated that it was to show He is God. He is in control from beginning to the end. And we know it's God's righteousness that is made clear in all of this. He says, particularly when they were entering the land of Israel at the beginning, it says, not for thy righteousness or for the uprightness of thine heart dost thou go to possess the land, but for the wickedness of the nations, the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee, and that he may perform the word which the Lord sware unto thy fathers, Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Understand therefore that the Lord thy God giveth thee not this good land to possess it for thy righteousness, for thou art a stiff-necked people. God was fulfilling the promises made to the fathers. If we turn to Romans chapter 15, we know that Christ has the same purpose. He says in verse 8, I tell you that Christ became a servant to the circumcised, or to the Jews, to show God's truthfulness, in order to confirm the promises given to the patriarchs, in order that the Gentiles or non-Jews might glorify God for his mercy. And so it was Jesus' purpose also to fulfill the promises given unto the fathers. It wasn't because the Jews were righteous or a great nation. It was because he promised their forefather Abraham that he would do it. And he was showing his righteousness and keeping his promises. And in doing so, he showed that he is God, that he knows the beginning from the end. He is God. And he declared it. Isaiah tells us that Israel, you are my witnesses, saith the Lord, that I am God.